Jason Derek Brown was born on July 1st, 1969 in Los Angeles, California to David John Brown Sr. and his wife. Raised in the city of Laguna Beach alongside his 3 siblings, including sister Jamie Martin and brother David John Brown II, Jason's early life appeared to follow a conventional Mormon family structure. However, beneath this exterior lay a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic that would profoundly shape his future criminal behavior. According to extensive interviews with his sister Jamie, their father, David Sr., was a physically abusive con man who had been expelled from Brigham Young University for theft and struggled with chronic gambling addiction. He routinely recruited his children to participate in stealing and confidence schemes, using cash bribes to maintain Jason's loyalty and complicity. Despite the toxic family environment, Jason managed to maintain the appearance of an admirable young man. In 1988, at age 19, he embarked on a 2-year mission to Paris, France, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Through this experience, he became fluent in French and met his future wife during the mission. Upon returning to the United States, he pursued higher education, earning both a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in international business from Brigham Young University. The turning point in Jason Brown's life trajectory occurred in 1995, a year that witnessed 2 critical events that fundamentally altered his path. First, his marriage, which had begun with such promise during his mission, ended in divorce. Second, and perhaps more significantly, his father mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind an immense trail of debts and bad credit. Family members reported that David Sr. had instructed them to sell everything because he wasn't coming back, though the exact circumstances of his disappearance remain unknown. Sister Jamie Martin has identified this period as the precise moment when Jason began exhibiting the same destructive patterns as their father. The loss of his marriage and the abandonment by his primary male role model apparently triggered a psychological transformation that would have deadly consequences. Jason embraced a hedonistic party lifestyle that stood in stark contrast to his upbringing, surrounding himself with what friends described as strippers and partiers while developing serious addictions to substances, alcohol, and gambling. By the late 1990s, Jason had relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, where he established multiple fraudulent business operations designed to fund his increasingly extravagant lifestyle. Operating under company names such as Toys Unlimited from his residential address, Jason engaged in sophisticated check and bank fraud schemes that generated substantial illegal income. He also claimed to operate a golf equipment import business, though investigators later determined this was largely a front for his criminal activities. These fraudulent illegal practices enabled him to maintain the facade of a wealthy entrepreneur throughout the early 2000s. His possessions included an impressive collection of luxury vehicles, jet skis, ATVs, boats, and other expensive equipment. Friends and acquaintances consistently described him as someone who wanted to buy the rounds and be everybody's friend, using his apparent wealth to gain social acceptance and admiration. He would often visit high-end car dealerships, appearing clean-shaven and professionally dressed, to purchase vehicles using falsified social security numbers and addresses. His ability to project an image of success and respectability made him particularly effective at fraud, as financial institutions and businesses had little reason to suspect such a polished, articulate individual of criminal intent. However, by 2004, the unsustainable nature of Jason's lifestyle had created a financial crisis. Despite generating substantial illegal income, his spending consistently exceeded his fraudulent earnings. He had defaulted on at least one significant loan and accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in additional debt. Creditors were beginning to pursue his assets aggressively, and the elaborate house of cards he had constructed was on the verge of collapse. On November 6, 2004, Jason purchased a .45 caliber Glock pistol from a firearms dealer in Utah. He underwent the required background check and submitted fingerprints to state and federal authorities, creating the very evidence that would later identify him as the killer. Shortly after acquiring the weapon, Brown enrolled in a firearms instruction course at Totally Awesome Guns and Range in Salt Lake City. His instructor, Clark Aposhian, later described Jason as an obnoxious student who appeared inexperienced with firearms despite his apparent confidence. During a practice session in the Arizona desert just days before the murder, Jason accidentally discharged his weapon into a pickup truck. Interestingly, Jason provided the owner of the truck with his real name, address, and phone number, promising to pay for the estimated $1,300 in damages. During his planning phase, Jason rented a hotel room at an Ahwatukee facility and spent approximately 1 week studying the armored car company's routes and schedules. Security footage from the hotel captured him having conversations with an unidentified male, who investigators believe may have been either an accomplice or unwitting witness to Jason's planning. At approximately 10 a.m. on Monday, November 29, 2004, Robert Keith Palomars arrived at the AMC Ahwatukee movie theater to collect the weekend's cash deposits. The 24-year-old armored car guard was a newlywed who was working for the armored car company to gain experience toward his goal of becoming a police officer. His mother, Lena Rodriguez, later described her son as a loving young man who brought joy to everyone around him. As Robert exited the theater carrying the money bag, Jason emerged from behind a ticket booth wearing a hooded sweatshirt. He fired 6 shots from his Glock, with 5 bullets striking Robert in the head at point-blank range. The guard, despite being armed, had no opportunity to defend himself against the surprise ambush. As Robert lay dying on the ground, Jason continued to fire before grabbing the money bag containing about $56,000 in cash. He then mounted a blue and silver mountain bike he had positioned nearby and fled through an alley, disappearing from the scene within minutes. Robert was then transported to Good Samaritan Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Initial witness descriptions suggested the shooter was a Hispanic male in his mid-20s. However, when investigators found Jason's abandoned bike, they were able to lift fingerprints off of it to identify the culprit. It was stated that Jason had hastily attempted to wipe the handlebars of his prints, but was unsuccessful. Forensic analysis also identified the weapon used, which led to the dealer who had sold Jason the gun. Surprisingly, even after committing the murder, Jason provided the previously mentioned truck owner with a cashier's check of the promised $1,300 through the mail. But before that, Jason had fled Phoenix in his BMW M3, initially heading toward the Mexican border. During this journey, he deliberately created an electronic trail of credit card purchases. However, this turned out to be a misdirection tactic. In Las Vegas, Jason switched vehicles, abandoning his BMW for a black Cadillac Escalade he had previously stored at a commercial facility. He disabled the vehicle's OnStar tracking system to prevent electronic surveillance. From Las Vegas, he drove to Orange County, California, where he briefly stayed with relatives. The critical mistake that alerted Jason to law enforcement's pursuit occurred on December 6, 2004. Against the advice of their own investigators, senior management at the Phoenix Police Department decided to hold a press conference announcing Jason as the primary suspect. This premature public announcement gave Jason approximately 1 hour's warning before the FBI arrived to execute their arrest warrant at his relative's residence. By the time agents reached the location, Jason had vanished, beginning what would become one of the most extensive manhunts in FBI history. On January 16, 2005, authorities discovered his abandoned Cadillac Escalade in a parking lot at Portland International Airport. This discovery raised more questions than it answered. The vehicle's location suggested several possibilities. Jason may have boarded a flight to an unknown destination, arranged alternative transportation, or used the airport location as another misdirection while continuing his escape. Despite extensive investigation of flight records, surveillance footage, and passenger manifests, the FBI found no evidence of Jason's departure from Portland International Airport. The lack of any electronic or documentary trail from this point forward led investigators to describe Jason as having become a ghost. The discovery of the vehicle also revealed that Jason had been in continuous contact with his family. Before abandoning the vehicle, he had mailed a package containing clothes and golf equipment to his older brother David Brown II in San Diego. This action would later result in federal charges against David for obstruction of justice, as he had received items from a fugitive and failed to cooperate fully with investigators. On December 8, 2007, nearly 3 years after the murder, Jason was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list as the 489th person to receive this designation. The FBI initially offered a reward of $100,000 for information leading to his capture, which was later doubled to $200,000 on March 25, 2013. Over the course of his time on the most wanted list, authorities received more than 10,000 tips from around the world. These leads came from across the United States and dozens of international locations, including numerous reported sightings in Canada, Europe, and Asia. However, the vast majority of these tips proved fruitless. Jason's appearance resembled countless other middle-aged white males, leading to an overwhelming amount of false positives. In fact, there were reports of individuals being falsely arrested after being mistaken for Jason. The most recent confirmed sighting of Jason occurred in August 2008 near the Hogle Zoo in Salt Lake City, Utah. An acquaintance who had served with him during their Mormon mission to France recognized him while both were stopped at a traffic light. The witness immediately recognized his former companion despite the passage of 4 years since the murder. According to the witness's account, Jason appeared to have a deeper tan and longer hair, suggesting he had been living in a sunny climate and had altered his appearance slightly. Upon making eye contact and realizing he had been recognized, Jason immediately accelerated through the red light and sped away from the scene, confirming his continued presence in the United States but providing no further leads. Law enforcement officials and independent experts have developed several theories about Jason's survival methods and current location. The most prominent hypothesis suggests he may be hiding within Mormon communities, using his prior social connections to blend seamlessly into LDS populations throughout Utah, Arizona, or other areas with significant Mormon presence. His fluency in French and previous missionary experience could also provide perfect cover within French-speaking Mormon communities in Quebec, Canada. Alternative theories propose that Jason may have fled internationally and established a new identity in France or other French-speaking nations. Some investigators have also speculated about possible locations in Asia, particularly Thailand, though these theories are based more on speculation than concrete evidence. On April 11, 1990, 4 commercial fishermen departed from McIntosh County Pier in Georgia aboard the 34-foot fiberglass snapper boat Casey Nicole. The vessel was owned by Doug Tyson and had recently undergone extensive maintenance work, spending 5 weeks in dry dock for repairs. The crew consisted of Captain Billy Joe Neesmith, 23, his older brother Nathan, aged 31, their nephew Keith Wilkes, 18, and family friend Franklin Brantley, 23. The men were embarking on what should have been a routine 7-day fishing expedition to Tiger's Ledge, an area approximately 80 to 90 miles off the South Carolina coast. Weather conditions were favorable at departure with clear skies and calm seas. The first day of the expedition proceeded without incident, but in the early morning hours of April 12, 1990, around 3:30 to 4 a.m., the situation rapidly deteriorated. Nathan, who was at the helm during these early hours, noticed that the vessel was handling differently than normal. The boat appeared sluggish and was riding unusually deep in the water, struggling to break through waves rather than riding over them. Upon investigation, the crew discovered approximately 1 foot of standing water throughout the vessel's interior. The water had infiltrated not only the engine compartment, but also the sleeping quarters where Keith and Franklin had been resting. Most critically, the boat's bilge pumps were completely inoperative, leaving the crew with no mechanical means to remove the accumulating water. The crew's situation became increasingly desperate as they attempted to manually bail water using buckets, forming a human chain in a futile effort to keep pace with the rising water levels. Their efforts were rendered even more hopeless when the Casey Nicole suffered a complete power failure, disabling not only the engine, but also the radio communication system. With no way to call for help and the vessel continuing to sink, Captain Billy Joe made the difficult decision to abandon ship. The crew's options for survival were severely limited by the poor condition of their safety equipment. The Casey Nicholl's single life raft was described as being in deplorable condition, with rotting material and a hole approximately the size of a quarter. Despite these deficiencies, all 4 men crowded into the 2-person raft as their vessel disappeared beneath the waves. The raft almost immediately began taking on water and threatened to sink under the weight of 4 adult men. But luckily, debris from the Casey Nicholl was floating nearby. The crew abandoned the failing life raft and moved to this more stable platform, lashing together various pieces of floating debris, including plastic polyball markers and a foam cooler to create a more substantial platform. It was at this moment that Nathan made a critical decision. Scanning the horizon, he spotted what he believed to be the hull of the Casey Nicholl floating approximately 3 to 4 miles away. Despite vehement protests from Billy Joe, Keith, and Franklin, Nathan announced his intention to swim to the partially submerged vessel in hopes of finding additional supplies or means of signaling for rescue. His companions pleaded with him to remain with the group, warning that separation would dramatically reduce everyone's chances of survival. However, Nathan was determined to attempt what he saw as their best hope for rescue, and despite weighing approximately 250 pounds, he entered the water and began to swim toward the distant hull. By the time he reached his destination and hauled himself onto the partially submerged wreckage, darkness had fallen and his 3 companions had vanished from sight. Nathan found himself alone on the unstable hull of his former vessel, approximately 67 miles east of Hilton Head Island. The following morning, Nathan observed a large freighter approximately 3 miles away, operating in the general area where he believed his companions might be located. The vessel's behavior struck Nathan as highly unusual and suspicious. Rather than maintaining a straight course, the freighter appeared to be conducting a deliberate search pattern, moving in circles and making multiple stops, as if picking up objects or people from the water. The ship continued these maneuvers for approximately 3 hours before departing the area. For 2.5 days, Nathan remained on the hull with no food or fresh water. His situation became even more dire when the hull began to sink further, threatening to take him down with it. But soon, a bit of relief came in the form of a large wooden and styrofoam bait box that broke free from the Casey Nicholl's deck and floated to the surface. This container, which Nathan described as being like a boat, provided him with a more stable platform and some protection from the elements. During his final days adrift, Nathan reported experiencing hallucinations, including hearing voices calling his name, which he attributed to divine intervention, keeping him alert and alive. His physical condition deteriorated rapidly from exposure, dehydration, and severe sunburn. On April 15, 1990, after 4 days adrift without food or water, Nathan was rescued by the crew of a passing fishing vessel approximately 20 miles off the Georgia coast. His condition was described as critical and he was immediately transported to medical facilities for treatment. The discovery of his survival sparked immediate hope that the other 3 crew members might also be found alive. The United States Coast Guard launched an extensive search and rescue operation covering a vast area of the Atlantic Ocean from Florida to Virginia. Multiple vessels participated in the search, including both Coast Guard cutters and private fishing boats whose crews knew the Neesmith family. Despite these comprehensive efforts, the search yielded minimal evidence of the missing men's fate. The only physical evidence recovered during the search consisted of a sleeping bag and a life vest found floating approximately 5 miles from Nathan's rescue location. Notably absent was any trace of the makeshift raft constructed from the hatch cover and debris. Approximately 6 months after the disappearance, the case took a bizarre turn with the beginning of a series of mysterious phone calls that would continue for nearly a year. The first calls were received on October 5th, 1990 by both Nathan's sister Oneida and boat owner Doug Tyson. The caller was consistently described as a male with a heavy Spanish accent who spoke broken English. During these initial calls, the mysterious caller could only repeat the phone numbers he had dialed and the names of the people he was calling. When recipients attempted to engage him in conversation or ask questions, the caller seemed unable to understand or respond, leading to speculation that he genuinely could not comprehend English. Between October 1990 and March 1991, a total of 7 calls were received. 3 to Oneida, and 4 to the Tyson family. Each call followed the same format, with the caller repeating the phone number and names before hanging up, offering no additional information or context. The final and most significant call occurred on March 6, 1991, when the caller deviated from his established pattern. Speaking in broken but understandable English, he delivered a single sentence. He said, "I'm bringing them home." The call was brief and the connection was lost almost immediately. No further calls were received after this date, and despite the promise implied in the caller's words, no one was ever brought back. The US government's official stance is that Billy Joe, Keith, and Franklin were lost at sea and are presumed dead. The families of the missing men, led by matriarch Cora Neesmith, have consistently rejected the official conclusion and maintained that the 3 men are alive and being held against their will in a foreign country. A key element that she often mentions is the mysterious freighter that Nathan reportedly saw. The family believes this vessel picked up the 3 men from their makeshift raft. The strange phone calls were interpreted as evidence that someone with knowledge of the men's whereabouts was attempting to communicate with their families. The family's belief is that the men were involved in a substance smuggling operation, possibly unknowingly, and were captured by foreign authorities or criminal organizations. This theory led the Neesmith family to conduct an exhaustive international search effort. They hired private investigators, offered a $50,000 reward for information, and searched extensively throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. The family search efforts later extended to Bermuda, the Bahamas, Haiti, Mexico, Cuba, and various South American countries. One of the most intriguing developments in the family's investigation came after the case was featured on the television program named Unsolved Mysteries. Following the broadcast, an immigration officer in Miami contacted the family to report that a Mexican man in an immigration detention facility claimed to have been imprisoned in Cuba with 3 Americans matching the missing men's descriptions. This lead prompted one of the Neesmith daughters and a private investigator to travel to Cuba undercover to investigate the claim. However, when the investigators reached Cuba, prison officials denied that any Americans matching the descriptions were being held there. Despite the official denial, family members remained convinced that the men had been imprisoned in Cuba at some point. Mrs. Neesmith noted that the Mexican informant's descriptions were remarkably accurate and that, quote, "it was so clear they had been there." The family returned to Cuba multiple times, asking different officials about the missing men, but never received confirmation of their presence. The other common theory that we briefly touched on was the substance smuggling possibility. The boat's mechanical failures, despite recent maintenance, could have been the result of modifications made for smuggling operations. And as mentioned, the mysterious freighter might have been part of a trafficking network. The separation of Nathan from the others could have been planned to provide a cover story for a botched smuggling operation. However, this theory lacks concrete evidence and has been disputed by those who knew the men personally. No evidence of substance involvement was ever discovered during the investigation, and family members have consistently denied any connection to illegal activities. On the other hand, a significant number of investigators and amateur sleuths have expressed skepticism about various aspects of Nathan's survival story. Critics argue that Nathan's decision to leave his companions and swim alone for over 7 hours was irrational and overall just highly suspicious. The fact that he was reportedly overweight and not in excellent physical condition makes the successful completion of such a swim even more questionable. Furthermore, the simultaneous failure of multiple systems in the vessel, despite recent maintenance, has raised suspicions about whether the reported mechanical problems actually occurred. Some investigators have suggested that these failures were either fabricated or deliberately caused, meaning some people believe that Nathan may have been somewhat responsible for the deaths of his companions. On February 26, 2007, the Chicago Police Department transported an unconscious man named Shannon Knight to Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. Prior to his stroke, the man had been residing at the Salvation Army homeless shelter in Chicago. The man had suffered significant brain damage, effectively erasing his memory and leaving him unable to recall his identity, family, or past life. While he appears lucid and maintains a calm demeanor, the neurological damage has created a permanent barrier to accessing his pre-stroke memories. Medical professionals determined that his condition would require indefinite state care, as he lacks the capacity to live independently and has no identifiable support system. Shannon is an African-American male standing 5 feet 7 inches in height. He bears a homemade tattoo on his right arm near the wrist featuring the Roman numeral 3. In terms of scars and other distinguishing marks, Shannon has a scar on the left side of his forehead, which he claims resulted from falling from a bus bench as a child. He also has a keloid scar on his chest and a mole located near or on his left eyebrow. One of the most complex aspects of the case involves the numerous aliases and street names associated with his identity. His fingerprints have been matched to arrest records under several variations of names, including Shannon Knight spelled with a K, Shannon Knight spelled with an N, Shannon Haight, Sanani Knight, and Sanai Knight. He has also been known by the street names Vino and Vina. The existence of this criminal history has been both helpful and problematic. While it provides fingerprint records that confirm his presence in Chicago, the multiple aliases have created confusion and dead ends in identification efforts. Ann Bealby, a forensic artist working on the case, noted that despite having mugshots dating back almost 20 years, no relevant information was discovered. Currently, Shannon resides at the Chicago Reed Mental Health Center on Chicago's northwest side. This state-run psychiatric facility serves as his long-term care home, not because he poses any threat to society, but because it represents the only available option for someone in his circumstances. Despite his extensive memory loss, Shannon retains some emotional memories and beliefs about his past life. He consistently maintains that he has a son and possibly a wife, though he cannot remember their names or any specific details about them. To manage his memory difficulties, he carries a red folder containing notes he writes to help jog his memory. The folder also contains a handmade greeting card that he hopes someday to give to the son he believes he has. On several occasions, he has provided other small details in regards to the life he believes he had. He claims his date of birth is November 2nd, 3rd, or 21st of 1976, which would make him 31 years old at the time of his stroke and approximately 49 years old as of 2025. But no corresponding birth certificate has been located in Cook County records. On April 29, 2005, during what should have been a happy family outing, 5-year-old Yuki Onishi vanished without a trace. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance have baffled investigators, search teams, and the public for nearly 2 decades. The disappearance occurred during Japan's Greenery Day, a national holiday dedicated to appreciating nature and environmental conservation. This celebration brought together approximately 60 people for a bamboo digging event in the remote Goshikidai Forest in Sakai. The forest is situated in a mountainous region that features dense bamboo groves interspersed with various trails and small ponds and streams. The forest topography consists of steep terrain with thick vegetation, making it both beautiful and potentially disorienting for visitors unfamiliar with the area. Among the 60 attendees were Yuki, her mother, and her 8-year-old sister. Yuki was described as an energetic and excited child who was particularly enthusiastic about the bamboo digging activity. At the time of her disappearance, she weighed 34 pounds and stood 3 feet 5 inches tall. She had black hair styled in a bob cut. She was wearing a pink hat, a long-sleeved shirt with red and orange patterns, described in some sources as stripes, white gloves, long blue pants, and pink shoes. Despite extensive searches involving thousands of people over multiple days, not a single piece of her clothing or any personal belongings were ever recovered. The bamboo shoot digging event commenced at 1 p.m. with approximately 60 participants scattered throughout the designated area of the forest. About 30 minutes into the event, Yuki successfully found her first bamboo shoot. She then excitedly ran to her mother to show off her discovery. After showing her mother the bamboo shoot, Yuki said that she wanted another and walked away to continue searching. This would be the last time her mother saw her. A junior high school student briefly greeted and spoke with her after 1:30 p.m., while a man spotted her around 1:40 p.m. but did not interact with her. These sightings helped investigators establish Yuki's general path through the forest before her disappearance. Approximately 20 minutes after Yuki had left to search for more bamboo shoots, her mother realized she could no longer see her daughter among the other participants. The family and other event attendees began searching the immediate area. As minutes turned into an hour with no sign of Yuki, the concern escalated from mild worry to genuine alarm. The dense forest and multiple trails made it easy for a child to become disoriented, but the complete absence of any trace was troubling. When the informal search by attendees yielded no results after a full hour, Yuki's family contacted police. Police officers arrived on scene at 3:45 p.m. and immediately began their own search efforts. When police efforts also proved fruitless, firefighters trained in search and rescue operations were called in to assist at 5 p.m. The search continued throughout the evening until 9 p.m., involving over 100 people. Despite this substantial effort, not a single trace of Yuki was discovered. Over the following days, the search effort expanded dramatically to include more than 3,000 people. The searchers combed through every accessible area of Goshikidai Forest, examining dense bamboo groves, checking potential hazards like steep drops or water features, and following every possible path Yuki might have taken. But yet again, no clues were found. There were no footprints, no disturbed vegetation indicating someone had passed through, no pieces of clothing caught on branches, and no signs of any struggle or disturbance. Perhaps the most puzzling aspect of the entire investigation was the behavior of the search dogs. Using Yuki's water bottle to establish her scent, the first police dog eagerly followed the trail from where she was last seen with her mother through the bamboo forest. The dog tracked the scent along what appeared to be Yuki's path as she moved away from the main group. However, at a specific location between the forest path and a nearby body of water, the dog suddenly and inexplicably stopped. This wasn't typical behavior for a trained search dog, which would normally continue following a scent trail until it either found its target or the trail became too old or contaminated to follow. Recognizing the unusual nature of this behavior, investigators brought in 4 additional police dogs the following day. All 4 dogs led investigators to the exact same spot where the first dog had stopped. Each dog displayed the same behavior, following the scent trail enthusiastically until reaching that specific location, then abruptly stopping and refusing to continue. This suggested that something had physically interrupted Yuki's scent trail at that precise location. Given the proximity of water to where the dogs lost Yuki's scent, investigators seriously considered the possibility that she had wandered to a nearby pond and accidentally drowned. To thoroughly investigate this possibility, police actually drained the entire pond. The operation was extensive and time-consuming, but investigators were determined to leave no stone unturned. However, the drained pond revealed nothing. No body, no clothing, no personal belongings. Investigators also considered whether Yuki might have been attacked by wildlife. The region was home to various animals that could potentially pose a threat to a small child. Initial speculation included large birds of prey such as eagles, but animal experts quickly dismissed this possibility. Other animal attacks, such as by bears or other large mammals, were similarly ruled out due to the lack of tracks, blood, disturbed vegetation, or any other physical evidence that would typically accompany such an incident. Later on, the investigation identified 2 witnesses who had seen Yuki after she left her mother. The first was a junior high school student who briefly greeted and spoke with Yuki after 1:30 p.m. This interaction was described as normal with nothing to suggest any distress or danger. The second witness was a man who spotted Yuki around 1:40 p.m. but did not speak to her. This sighting helped establish the time frame and general direction of Yuki's movements before her disappearance. Both witnesses were thoroughly interviewed, but neither provided information that led to any significant breakthroughs. Perhaps the most significant and troubling aspect of the witness testimony concerned reports of a suspicious individual in the area. Multiple attendees at the bamboo event reported seeing a man walking through the forest carrying a very large backpack. Several witnesses noted that the backpack was unusually large enough, they later realized, to potentially contain a child of Yuki's size. Despite extensive media coverage of the disappearance, this individual never came forward to identify himself or provide any information to investigators. Given that the case received significant attention in local and national media, it would be reasonable to expect that an innocent hiker would have contacted police to clarify his presence in the area and potentially assist with the investigation. The man's failure to come forward, combined with the timing of his presence and the unusual nature of his large backpack, made him a person of significant interest to investigators. Unfortunately, none of the witnesses who saw him were able to provide detailed enough descriptions to create a useful composite or to aid in identification efforts. Over the years, Yuki's family has never given up hope of finding her or learning what happened to her. They established a dedicated website to gather information about the case and have continued to urge anyone with relevant information to come forward. The family's persistence has helped keep the case in the public eye and may have encouraged ongoing investigation efforts. As of 2025, Yuki would be approximately 25 years old. The Frankfurt Slasher is a moniker given to an unknown serial killer or group of killers responsible for a series of brutal murders in the Frankfurt neighborhood of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania during the late 1980s. Despite decades passing, the true identity and full details surrounding the Frankfurt Slasher remain unknown. The confirmed string of killings attributed to the Frankfurt Slasher took place between August 19, 1985 and September 6, 1990. The victims were predominantly women between their late 20s and late 60s, most of whom were white and struggling with issues such as alcoholism, homelessness, or mental health problems. These underlying issues played a role in their frequenting of local bars, especially the Golden Bar, also called Goldie's. Jean Durkin, only 28, was murdered on January 8, 1987, stabbed an astounding 74 times with her body left in an alley. Margaret Vaughn, 66, was killed on November 11, 1988, stabbed 29 times after being seen leaving a bar with the suspect. Teresa Sciortino, 30, died on January 19, 1989, following the similar modus operandi with violent stabbing and her body left in an abandoned location. The final confirmed victims were Carol Dowd, murdered on April 29, 1990, who was stabbed 36 times, disemboweled, and was found in an alley behind a fish store. Michelle Daner, who was killed on September 6, 1990, in a murder that mirrored all the previous cases in its brutality and execution. Victims were nearly always found either partially or fully nude, stabbed numerous times, assaulted post-mortem, and left in deliberate positions that suggested the killer wanted the deaths to be discovered. For the first several years of the killing spree, Philadelphia police were hesitant to publicly acknowledge that a serial killer was at work in their city. The breakthrough came after the third murder, when undeniable similarities in method, victimology, and locations pushed both local media and police towards making the connection and dubbing the perpetrator the Frankfurt Slasher. A key characteristic that emerged throughout the investigation was the recurring sighting of a middle-aged white male at or near the scenes of the crimes. This suspect was sometimes described as overweight, balding, and wore glasses. He also had a noticeable limp. Multiple witnesses described seeing this man offer comfort to victims or leave drinking establishments with them shortly before their deaths. Police circulated a composite sketch based on these witness descriptions and canvassed the neighborhood extensively, focusing their attention on men known to frequent the local bars and offer advice or support to troubled women. One particular suspect emerged as a person of significant interest, a local man who called himself as a kind of counselor or minister for women struggling with various personal problems. Police managed to collect a DNA sample from this individual before he died of natural causes, though no forensic link between this man and the crimes has ever been confirmed or publicly disclosed. On April 29, 1990, Carol Dowd was discovered behind Newman's Seafood, a fish store where she and many others in the neighborhood regularly bought food and sometimes met up at. Police conducted surveillance and neighborhood interviews that led them to focus on Leonard Christopher, a black man who worked at the shop. According to detectives, Christopher had no solid alibi for the night of the murder, and some witnesses claimed to have seen him with Dowd or acting suspiciously around the crime scene. Christopher's prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, including questionable witness identifications, inconsistencies in testimony, and what many observers felt was a community desperate for closure regardless of whether the accused was guilty or innocent. He was convicted for Dowd's murder, but was never charged or tried for the other slasher cases, which remained officially unsolved. Even to this day, there are many who believe that Christopher was wrongly convicted. One reason for this is the descriptions given of the murderer by witnesses did not match Christopher's appearance. Additionally, the final slasher murder occurred while Christopher was incarcerated in September 1990. Modern reviews of the case argue that Christopher was essentially a scapegoat and that his conviction represented a serious miscalculation of justice driven by social and racial pressures of the time period. Christopher maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration until his death from cancer in 2010, never wavering in his denial of involvement in any of the Frankfurt slasher murders. As for the previously mentioned final murder, it involved a woman named Michelle Daner. Michelle, like all the earlier victims, was found stabbed to death with her body posed in a provocative manner. She had last been seen alive with a middle-aged white man, matching the pattern established in previous cases. In October 2023, while serving time for unrelated violent crimes, including the murder of a neighbor and the stabbing of two fellow inmates, a man named Raymond Wexel Jr. reportedly confessed to being the Frankfurt slasher and claimed responsibility for all the murders in the series. However, there are significant doubts about the validity of this confession. The primary issue is that he would not have matched the age or description provided by numerous eyewitnesses at the time of the murders. Based on his current age and the timeline of the crimes, Wexel would have been much too young. Despite these obvious inconsistencies, police are investigating his claims, though no conclusion has been announced publicly as of 2025. The archaeological site of Herxheim is one of Europe's most disturbing prehistoric mysteries. Herxheim was first discovered in the 1980s through surface prospection, but its true extent only emerged following construction work in 1996 when local workers uncovered human bones and skulls. What began as a salvage excavation to rescue materials from construction damage evolved into one of the most significant archaeological investigations in Europe. The site has undergone two major excavation campaigns conducted by the Rhineland-Palatinate State Office for the preservation of historical monuments. The first campaign, which took place from 1996 to 1999, was directed by Anne-Marie Hauber as a rescue operation, while the second campaign from 2005 to 2008 was an excavation under Andrea Zieblance's supervision. Herxheim dates from approximately 5300 to 4950 BC, placing it within the early to final phases of the linear pottery culture. The excavated structures revealed a substantial village spanning up to 15 acres. The most distinctive feature were likely the oval pits that were within and surrounding the settlement. There were approximately 80 pits holding the scattered, fragmented remains of hundreds of individuals. Researchers have identified remains from at least 500 people, with estimates suggesting the total could exceed 1,000 once the entire site is excavated. The human remains range from fetuses and newborns to elderly adults, both male and female. Interestingly, these were not conventional burials. The bones were systematically shattered and dispersed throughout the pits, with only rare instances of intact or anatomically connected remains. And it's through researching the bones that officials believe that they belong to victims of ritualized cannibalism. Detailed analysis revealed extensive human-induced modifications that mirrored animal butchering techniques. Many of the bones carried marks that are believed to have been caused by stone tools that specialized in stripping flesh from bone. In just one of the many deposits, there were almost 2,000 bone fragments from at least 10 different people that showed evidence of defleshing. Longer bones were also cracked using hammer-on-anvil techniques to extract marrow. But perhaps most disturbing was the careful processing of human skulls. Heads were skinned, starting with a long incision from nose to nape to remove the scalp. The skulls were then broken to preserve the vault while likely extracting the brain, creating skull cups. Some bones even displayed what researchers interpret as human bite marks near fractured ends. One of Herxheim's most intriguing aspects is the origin of the victims. Multiple lines of evidence indicate that the majority came from distant regions. The ceramics found with human remains represent 8 different geographical regions across Central Europe. The pottery indicated deposition over no more than 50 years, but stylistically varied, with pieces originating up to 400 to 500 kilometers away, including the Elbe Valley. At this point, you may be wondering what exactly is the mystery in regards to this entry. Well, it primarily lies in why the ritual cannibalism occurred in the first place and just how so many people from across Central Europe were brought to that single location. And that's not to mention how they were able to maintain this system for potentially decades. The most widely accepted interpretation suggests Herxheim functioned as a major religious center where people from across Europe gathered for ritualized human sacrifice and cannibalism. This theory proposes that people came voluntarily from distant regions to participate in ceremonies where sacrifice would have played an important role. An alternative theory suggests Herxheim was the center of a successful warrior culture that conducted extensive raids across Europe, bringing captives back for ritual consumption.